Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on the Grants Impact Story Tool. We have several folks registered from federal, state and local, and commercial sectors, and we are glad to have you all. I want to quickly introduce REI Systems and our speakers today. My name is Subhash, Kari, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at REI Systems. I've supported multiple grant-making agencies with solutions in the grants management, app modernization, shared services, and business intelligence areas. With me, I have Rujuta Waknis, who leads our grants offering. I'll let her introduce herself.
Sure. Thank you, Subhash. I've been working on enterprise grants management systems for the last 6 years. And in the grants offering capacity, we've worked on a number of different solutions for different customers. A big one that we worked on last year is GIS, which we'll be talking about today. A couple of housekeeping items before we move on. For your awareness, this session is being recorded so that we can broadcast it later on our YouTube channel. Also, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask along the way, in your GoToMeeting widget that you see on your screen, you'll see a little icon with a hand on it, and that's how you can sort of raise your hand and we can let you ask a question. Another way to ask a question is also to type it in the question panel, and we will get to those typed in questions at the end of the session. So we will try to answer questions along the way, but we will definitely get to all of the questions at the last about 10 minutes or so of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rujuta. So today's topic is around the Grants Impact Story Tool. Just to give you a little bit of background, we built this tool as part of the Opportunity Project, which is a process for engaging government, communities, and the technology industry to create digital tools that address our greatest challenges as a nation. This process helps to empower people with technology, make government data more accessible and user-friendly, and facilitates cross-sector collaboration to build new digital solutions with open data. We participated in this project because OMB had reached out to us seeking our interest in participating in it. Part of the reason they did that is because REI is in the business of improving grants outcomes for the past 20 years. We provide advice, systems, and analytic solutions to help our customers meet their mission. We support more than 20 federal, state, and local customers. And we also run a Grants Breakfast Forum in partnership with George Washington University to bring best practices from the community together. So if you haven't signed up yet, you can visit our website and should be able to find a link to sign up. We also offer live streaming for it, and it typically happens, every other month. The next one actually happens to be the end of this month on 30th of May. And the topic is, how can we reduce the burdens of grants management from a grantee's perspective? One of the reasons why we selected this topic is because we got some feedback from grantees as part of grants management, grantees as well as grant-making agencies as part of a survey that we conduct in partnership with George Washington University and the National Grants Management Association. The survey is conducted on an annual basis, and last year we invited more than 5,000 people to participate in it. About 600 or so sort of responded. And there was sort of an interesting and a relevant insight from our 2018 survey in the context of today's conversation. In a surprising mixed result, 55% of state, local, and tribal grant managers reported that the performance of their grant programs improved over the previous 12 months. But in contrast, the largest group of federal grant managers, 43% of them, said that they can't tell whether their program's performance improved because performance data is not available. Since the federal government issues more than $700 billion in grants and accomplishes many major missions through the efforts of grants recipients, this seemed kind of odd to us. So it appears like the taxpayers really don't know what they're getting for their money. And that sort of brings us to the topic of connecting basically spend with performance data. I certainly hope that this the results from the opportunity project, as well as some of the coverage that was received on our survey, sort of influences a lot more programs to look at their performance management practices in the coming years. So we have been supporting performance management for multiple programs in the health, infrastructure development, education kind of domains. And at a very, very high level, we have sort of distilled the performance management process into sort of these 5 phases. So, real quick, I think, you start with basically with planning, where you look at what is sort of the legislative intent of that program in terms of objectives, how much funding is available, and how you guys are going to track basically the key performance indicators. Then sort of there is this notion of having policy be involved or developed, where you can provide guidance to the grant recipients. You can identify which data collection instruments you are going to use to collect the data. Then you need like a system that will allow the grantees to submit the data, make sure that there is quality built into their submissions, and then create an experience that reduces the burden of compliance from the grantee perspective. Once the data comes in, then you have the ability to perform some more qualitative checks, perform assessments, perhaps do some benchmarking, and then offer feedback that can be used for program evaluation purposes. And the last step is then sort of the dissemination, right? So once you have the data, what do you do with it? And that is where you can create impactful stories that you can convey to different audiences. So for example, to the public, you can tell them how much money was spent and what sort of was delivered, for those dollars. Likewise, within your organization, you can also create more impactful stories for your executives, as well as when you are talking to either the federal or the state legislators, you can use the information from this process to make a case for budget justification or to figure out basically sort of what is working, what is not working, and make sort of improvements. So the key, I think, to connecting the spend data to the performance data is to first make sure that you actually have a performance management process and you have access to the performance data. So this slide sort of summarizes the challenge from the opportunity project that we picked. And this challenge essentially was calling out for finding digital solutions to connect federal spending data with sort of the performance data. I'll sort of let you sort of read the details about the challenge, but we were sort of very excited about this because we did not want to take an approach and build a solution that will only offer this connection for a particular program or for a particular domain, such as, let's say, health or education. We challenged ourselves to find a solution that can provide a comprehensive view across all of the programs in the federal assistance listing catalog. So I would let sort of Rujuta tell you sort of the story of how we went about building this tool, and then she'll be able to demonstrate that tool to you as well.
Thank you, Subhash. As we looked at the challenge statement that the Opportunity Project had provided, before we started getting into the solution, we used a customer journey map to identify, think through the experience that an engaged citizen currently has without any tools in place, to find this kind of information, understand the information, take away key findings from that, and then leave or move on from that experience as a better informed citizen. We looked at the problems of the disparate websites, so many different places to find so many different kinds of information, it presented in so many different ways. As a citizen, you would have to really hone in on the main pieces to be able to make the connections by yourself. Some programs went through a lot of trouble to publish this information on their websites. Some had no way, we were not able to find any kind of information about certain programs. Everybody presented in different ways. Even when the information was presented, the context was not always provided to the extent that an average lay person would understand. There weren't always insights. Sometimes the data was available, but what does that mean? Was the program doing well? Was it not doing well? There was no way to understand all of that. So overall, there were a lot of gaps that we found in the current state. Being able to analyze that helped us hone in on how we were going to try to solve these problems. Obviously, we needed to have it in one location, in one place, so that all of that information, there was one place to get to see all of that information. We wanted to be able to tell these grant stories in a consistent format, so you were able to see the same logical connections for any kind of grant program. And we also wanted to provide insights. So it wasn't just about the data, but what that meant to the federal program managers, but also to the citizens. So this is how we sort of started figuring out the solution to that particular challenge statement. So once we came to the point where we had an idea of where we wanted to get to, we started talking about how. We know that across the customers that we support and the different grant programs that we are engaged with, every single grant program has different objectives, different goals. Therefore, their performance data is very, very different. There is, even within an agency, across their bureaus, things are different. It's very difficult to standardize performance data. We completely get that. But we do think that once you have performance data, presenting it in a consistent, structured, intuitive way is possible across different grant programs. So we wanted to validate this hypothesis. Again, since the engaged citizen was a target for us, we had to be able to present it in an easy to understand, intuitive way. And we do believe very strongly that publishing performance data to the public certainly drives accountability, both from the federal side and the grantee side as well. So the way we wanted to present this in our tool was using a concept called the logic model. Some of you may be familiar with the logic model, but for those of you who are not, I'll just spend a couple of minutes to talk about it. A logic model has been used in the program evaluation activities by grant programs over the last couple of decades. Some agencies even require grantees to submit logic models for their own grant justifications in their application process. What it really does is, in the 7 building blocks that you see on the screen in front of you, describe all of the factors and all of the actions that a grant program must take to produce the outputs and outcomes that it is looking to achieve. So at the top, you'll see the external factors in the gray. Those are any kind of political, environmental factors that are outside of the control of the program, but do have an impact on the program. For example, the appropriation for that year might be based on certain legislative acts that impact their funding. The next box below that is the resources box on the left-hand side. We interpreted that as the inputs that go into the program, like the funding value for that year. The next box is activities, which is the actions that the agency actually took to either distribute the funding or to provide the resources to the grantees to produce the outputs that they need. The outputs are the direct results of that funding, whether that was staff that was hired, or vaccinations that was given, or students that were served, or properties that were repaired or impacted. That is the direct result of that funding. And then the bottom bars, at the lower layer on the screen, you can see the outcomes, which the logic model separates out into a time dimension of short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. This means that over time, once the outputs were produced, how did the impact of those results actually get to the beneficiaries? The logic model doesn't define the time. It doesn't say short term is 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It's up to the person evaluating or looking at the program to make up that decision. So we wanted to use this basic framework to describe our program. This we've also included a reference here for those of you who are interested in learning more. This framework is described really well in the Handbook of Practical Program Evaluation. And one of the authors and contributors to this is Kathy Newcomer, who is the Dean of the GWU Grants Program, who also we work with in our Grants Management Breakfast Forum that Subhash mentioned earlier. Using this particular framework, we wanted to start validating our model, and obviously we couldn't go after every single grant program possible, but we wanted to pick 3 completely different grant programs to ensure that the model worked. The 3 ones that we picked was a health center program from the Health Resources and Services Administration in HHS, an education program, the 21st Century Community Learning Centers from the Department of Education, and FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So this allowed us to pick completely different domains and leverage the same model. Part of the challenge was for us to leverage publicly available data sets from across the federal systems. So we went through, we utilized quite a wide variety of data. Some of these you might be familiar with, like USA Spending and SAM.gov. For a lot of the program performance data, we obviously had to go straight to the agency program website. The ones that had performance data were actually few and far between overall, and the ones that we were able to find, we picked the 3 that I'm going to show you today. The engaged citizen, or the average American person, was what our main focus was. So the website, as you'll see, is targeted very much for people who perhaps are not as familiar with the grants management environment or landscape, may not know grant making terms, are not intimately familiar with grant programs. So we've tried to make it really easy for anyone to understand. As we were thinking through this solution, we came up with actually a lot of ideas about how other
welcome to the webinar.
Users might also benefit from this particular tool. We are still in the process of figuring out the roadmap for getting to those. But right now, our focus has continued to be the engaged citizen. Okay, so with that, I'm going to head into the demo. Our website is already published and publicly available. It's just.reisystems.io. I'm going to move into my browser view. Okay, so this is the home page. As you can see, I'm going to go over a few components of the home page and then drill down into the program. We have laid out the information right at the top of the home page in a way that immediately starts highlighting a few snapshots of program data and sort of piques interest and gets people to try to want to learn more. So you'll see little snapshots of information here that are coming straight away, are coming directly from the performance data of those programs. We have cards here that showcase the programs, and again, trying to highlight certain important features or pieces of information so that immediately you are trying to understand what these programs are and what they mean to the public. And we're also calling out all of the data sources that our information is fed from. Before I drill down into the program, I'm going to highlight the an about page really quick. We are explaining what this tool is and why we built it. We are explaining to folks that may not be as familiar with the logic model, what it does and what it's meant to be. And then a little bit about the opportunity project, which was our foundation or the trigger for this. And then, of course, a little bit of information about us. So I'm going to start with the Health Center program, show you all the screens and the information, and then we'll look at the other 2 programs quickly as well. This is the program page for the Health Center program. Right at the top, you'll see what that program name is and a little bit of information about what that does. We did look at the CFDA number or the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance so that we could be able to tie it to all of the legislation and all of the background behind it. As we were doing this analysis, we realized that sometimes there wasn't a direct one-to-one connection between the CFDA listing and actual grant program. So as we came to that conclusion, we also added the related numbers. What that means is, for a particular program, it actually might be fed through 2 or 3 different CFDA numbers. We also noticed the reverse, where a CFDA number might have several different grant programs that all are fed by one CFDA listing. So we tried to account for all of those different scenarios. The first page on the program is the logic model page, and I'll just scroll really quickly so that you can see. This is the page that actually describes all of the factors or pieces of information that we just talked about from the logic model. And you'll see that it's all based on the fiscal year, because so many factors and so many attributes change based on the fiscal year. So in 2015, things are going to be slightly different. First box is the external factors, as I mentioned, which might be political, environmental, socioeconomic things that affect the grant program. In this case, for example, in 2011, the Affordable Care Act really established a health center fund that provided a whole slew of additional funding to this program. So the funding or the input to this program went significantly higher since 2011. Next, 2 boxes 2, 3, and 4 relate to the resources, the actions, and the outputs for that grant program. So here you can see 4.15 billion was funded in 2015, and the main focus of the funding was to provide primary health, oral health, and substance use disorder services for that particular year. Again, so this is the kind of information that might change based on the fiscal year. And then the results is what happened as a direct result of that funding. Well, that particular year, 24.3 million patients were serviced through this funding. Okay. Below that is the outcome information. Now, as I mentioned, the logic model doesn't describe the time dimension of what a short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcome is. So for our particular purpose, what we chose to do is have a short-term outcome, which is the performance based on the performance data collected within 1 year of that funding. But the intermediate and long-term outcomes we clubbed together to see what was the overall impact of that over time. So for this particular program, since it's related to health, the measures, performance measures are closely linked to the Healthy People 2020 information. So what we did is combine the performance data of the program with overall national level Healthy People 2020 outcomes. So you can see that by using this funding in 2015, the HIV, in the HIV domain, the number of new diagnoses went up for this particular program. But overall, nationally, the numbers are perhaps receding since then. So you also get to see overall impact of this program. How does it fit in the national landscape? This program has many different measures, so you're able to see all of them. For each particular measure, there might be different metrics that are available. So you're able to see that kind of information to check the outcome for each. Since there's a lot of information presented in that easy to understand format, we also have a long page sort of view where you don't have to click into each box. You can also see all of this information in one page as well. You can look at the information again based on fiscal year so that you can see what is the latest available as well. Okay. The next page that we provided was the program details page. And in this page, we wanted the user to really understand what the program was about, not just the performance data. So we tried to pick visual information, visual details of the program from the agency website. In this particular case, we found a really nice video that is published on the HRSA YouTube channel and we try to show you what the health center program is about. We have information about program managers from the HRSA agency, and then the rest of the information is information that's available in the CFDA as well, about what the focus of the program is, what's the main legislation behind it, who's eligible, who can apply, how you apply, and so on. The next page is a commentary page, and this is sort of the insights around that program. There are a lot of studies that are conducted on some of these grant programs by experts in the field. So we linked any available independent case studies or analyses or evaluations of the program in one place so that you have access to see what experts are saying about it. And then from the agency budget justifications, we were also able to pull what the federal agencies are saying about this program and how they think it has changed or impacted their beneficiaries in the last few years of funding. And then the last page is in the news section. In this particular section, we try to pull any articles or publications that were available in the media about this program, or even any success stories that were available for you to directly see the impact to the main beneficiaries. So we'll go to the next program now, the hazard mitigation program. So as you can see, this is now a disaster relief program, but our structure and our pages are exactly the same. We have the name on the top, the CFDA numbers as well, and then the logic model numbers are exactly the same. The performance and the outcome is completely different. So using this model, we are showing different kinds of programs. For example, in this particular program in 2010, 533 million was given out in funding to their grantees, and 815 projects, which was the result of that funding, were funded by that agency. The main focus was for creating proactively renovating areas of frequent disaster zones. So before the next disaster hits, to provide things like acquisitions of property in places that were damaged, to provide education awareness to citizens in case a disaster occurs, also to change elevations and things in houses. So those are the kind of activities. Now, in terms of the outcomes, you'll see the impact here is presented in a completely different way. What we are showing here is the federal dollars that were given out. And because FEMA has done case studies and analyses for this particular program, they are able to analyze or compute the dollar value of the benefit that particular funding provides. So a very different way to present the outcomes here. And the program details page, the commentary page, the program details has some information from the FEMA website, which it looks like we're having trouble connecting to right now. But the commentary page, similar to the health center program, has independent studies that have been conducted, so you can see what experts are saying, and then budget justifications from that particular program. Similar to the health center program, we're trying to provide information from the media here as well. And then the last program is the Community Centers program from the Department of Education. Again, very different grant program, very different objectives and goals, but the information is presented in the very same way. In this case, 1.13 billion that was given out in 2015 had 752,000 students served through this program. And in this case, what we were trying to show is what was the increase in grades. That was the outcome that the program is tracking in different ways, in mathematics, in English, and also in teacher-reported improvements in behavior and participation. So all of those are represented, and over time, because we didn't segregate it by short-term and long-term here, you're able to see the changes that the program saw. Now here again, I want to point out that we are just showing the data in terms of what is available. There is no commentary or insights on this particular page. It is representing as is accurate information. And then in the following pages, like the commentary, you will see insights and other details. So right now we feel like we've validated our model using 3 completely different grant programs, and we think the framework is pretty strong and able to incorporate all of the different nuances and variances in how each program collects and publishes their performance data. Okay. Going to move back to the slides at this point. A minute to get screens going. Okay. So we're going to wrap up here and then get into the questions. So as Subhash mentioned in the performance measurement framework, when each grant program is looking at how they plan, how they collect, and how they disseminate information. The GIST tool really is the output or the main beneficiaries of that dissemination phase, where you have done all the hard work of planning and collecting and analyzing and reviewing your performance. You're ready at this point to publish it and have everyone sort of consume that data in a easy to understand way. We do see, based on all of this engagement and experience with the programs that we talked to for GIST, other programs when we were trying to recruit them for this tool, that everybody is in very different places. All the agencies are in different places in this spectrum. Some are doing a really thorough job of planning, collecting, and then publishing their data. But many agencies are at the point where they perhaps either have the measures that they want to collect, but they're collected in an unstructured format. Therefore, it's difficult to aggregate and then publish it in an easy way. Some agencies are at the point where they may not be able to have clear performance measures that they can track and collect information against. And some agencies are at the point where they are collecting data just through emails or Word documents or things like that. So there is a whole wide variety of maturity along this spectrum, but we do believe that with the right focus and the right information, it is possible for agencies to move along the spectrum and get to a point where they can truly publish their data in an easy to understand way. So what does this mean in terms of the GIST tool? So we have validated our model. We believe it works. We think that the federal agencies can actually use this kind of tool for advocating for their grant programs. So many times in the media, we see articles or inputs from experts asking, why is so much funding going for this? Why do we need this particular program? Can these programs be combined? Things like that. This kind of tool or framework allows agencies to get ahead of that and proactively advocate for their grants and the impact that they're making in a significant way to communities and neighborhoods around the country. This framework can be leveraged by anybody. As you saw, the logic model is available. It's a common framework that a lot of programs use, but it can be used by agencies. They could publish it on their own websites to showcase and highlight the impacts that their grants are making. And this particular dissemination tool goes towards the results-oriented grants management that OMB is actively advocating for, that the President's management agenda has identified in cross-agency priority goal 8, and that a lot of agencies are looking at how to move the needle in terms of providing that performance and outcome information for each of their grant programs. So with that, I'm going to stop. Subhash, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I think we can take questions and
okay.
I can conclude. So.
Okay, so I'm going to look here and see if we have any questions. Please feel free to ask questions at this point. Either you can raise your hand or type in the question in your webinar, GoToWebinar tool on the left. Okay, so we have a question. I'll read it out. If we want to use this tool, what are our options? So Subhash, would you like to take that?
Sure. So as Rujuta was mentioning, this tool was developed as part of the Opportunity Project. Currently, I think this tool is available publicly. If you want to use this tool to validate whether it's going to work for your agency or not, or for your program or not, we are happy to work with like a handful of additional programs. If you have publicly available data, or if you have data that you are willing to share with us, we are happy to sort of spend some time and load it up on the tool and sort of show it to you. So that's one option, and that for that you don't have to it's not going to cost you anything other than just time to actually get us the data and maybe answer some questions. On the other hand, if you want to use this tool and make it sort of part of your agency or organizational website, then I think we can have a conversation. We can sort of make the code available, or depending on your needs, if you have additional need for help, we can actually offer that as well. Currently, we are not licensing this software, as such. We are happy to sort of make it available so that all of the programs can tell stories about their grants to the public.
Thank you, Subhash. The next question is, what is the cost associated with this software? And I believe that you answered a part of that question already. Another question we just got is, are you planning to add different grant programs to this tool in the future? So as Subhash mentioned, at this point, we are not actively reaching out, but if someone is interested in having this tool advocate for their program, then we are happy to help out.
Okay. Any other questions?
One question is, how did we get access to all of the data sets that we showed on the screen? So that's an interesting question, because every single data set had a different format for access. Some of them we were able to download directly from the website and get that data into our system. Some of the others we had to reach out to the federal owners of those data sets and get information to connect to their data systems and extract that data. So there were a different variety of mechanisms that we had to use to actually get data from all of those places.
I think because the scope of the Opportunity Project was to use like publicly available data, in this project we didn't actually have to fight the battle of the agencies having to work to release information. The data was already publicly available. We just had to figure out what was the most effective way to get access to the latest information and keep it current. So we'll wait for a couple more minutes to see if there are any additional questions. I do want to sort of make one point that in order for you to be able to use this tool, you do need actually access to high quality performance data that addresses the key performance indicators that you are looking to achieve. We have found that some of these tools are often, I think, building custom tools to collect performance data can get sort of very expensive. But REI, because of our experience, is actually in the process of piloting sort of a SurveyMonkey for grants, if you will, kind of tool, in the next 60 days. We believe that we have the ability to offer a low-cost cloud-based solution, and we are in the process of identifying agencies or in state and local programs or customers who are interested in participating in that pilot. If you are interested in participating in that pilot, please get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to work with you to get your feedback and show you the concept. The intent of that particular capability is to provide you an end-to-end solution so that you can, if you have data collection instruments available, you can quickly set them up in the tool, collect the data, and you would only have to pay for when you are actually collecting the data or when your users are actually using. So almost like on an annual basis or quarterly basis, whatever the frequency that you guys are using. So we want to pilot that kind of model and see whether it's going to work. And so if you are interested in participating in that pilot, please get in touch with us.
Okay, if does anyone else have any questions that we haven't yet answered? Okay, there's a question here from Nadi. Nadi, I'm going to unmute your mic so that you can ask your question. Oh, looks like you dropped off. Okay. Anyone else? You can type in your questions or raise your use the little hand icon to raise your hand so that I can unmute your mic for you to ask the question. Just pause here for a minute to see if anyone is typing. Okay, so I don't see any additional questions coming in, so we'll stop here. Thank you so much for joining this call. I hope you got a lot of information about our tool and why we went about creating it. If you have any questions for us after this, please feel free to contact me. My name is Rujuta Waknis, and my email address is rujuta.waknis@reisystems.com. You can also connect to us from our website. There is a way to send in questions or ask information through our REI Systems website as well, and that's www.reisystems.com. Oh, before we log off, it looks like we have a question that just came in. How did you standardize the different data sets? Is the question. Again, I think that's an interesting question because we spent a lot of time in terms of the data sets. Because of the way we already understand grant data, using the public data sets like the USA spending, grants.gov, sam.gov data was easy because we knew the way to logically link and make the data presentable. For the performance data, as I mentioned, we know that every single performance collection or intent is very, very different. So we did not actually standardize any performance data. We took the performance data the way it was provided to us and then laid it out in our tool in a measure and value format so that we kept the structure consistent, but the data elements themselves were not standardized.
And if I may add, I think like a couple other things that we did standardize is that we did standardize and create a data set around the logic model. And then the performance data itself, we came up with a way to store it using the time dimension, depending on whatever level that the program has available. So as Rujuta was showing, for the health center program, we had the ability to load up 2 data sets for short-term and then intermediate and long-term outcomes. Whereas for a couple other programs, they only had like 1 data set, and there was no way to actually correlate that to longer term outcomes, for example. So we sort of created a way to sort of standardize that. So by standardizing the lookup data, standardizing the logic model, and then coming up with an approach to store sort of the performance data in a consistent manner, we were able to sort of reduce the effort that is required to present this data in this tool.
Okay, we are getting a couple of more questions, so I'll go through those. Were there any significant gaps between internal data sets from each of the 3 federal agencies? I wouldn't say that there were gaps from the program data. We took the information that they already had publicly available. Sometimes we had to ask for time from their program experts for interpreting that data. For example, the FEMA hazard mitigation program that I showed you had net impact and dollar value. So understanding the intent of what was collected and how it was presented was some of the challenges that we faced. We did see quality issues in some of the federal standard data sets. For example, in the USA spending data set for funding, some programs had really good data or information in the most recent fiscal years, but going back to 2010 or 11 and 12, perhaps the information wasn't as comprehensive or accurate. So we saw data gaps in the overall process. The way we were able to resolve that is by going to those agency websites and getting the funding for the previous years from their direct data stores or data warehouses.
If I may add one more thing, so I think so Rujuta answered that question from the perspective of the data that we actually received for these 3 programs that were selected. What I can tell you is that trying to get more than 3 programs, it was very challenging to find federal grant programs who actually had performance data that was publicly available, that actually was in a format that we could actually use to present and tell the story. And the reason I'm sort of making that point is because we had support and access from OMB and the Opportunity Project to reach out to different federal agencies and find out who is interested in giving data from their programs. And there were very few actually that raised hands. And even within the ones that raised hands, there were very specific programs that actually had the ability to provide that information. So another thing that we hope is that while the gap may not be in the individual data sets, the fact that a number of programs do not have performance data is something that we hope that federal agencies as well as state and local governments sort of look within their organizations.
And I would just add to that the number of agencies that have publicly available performance data, we would love to see that number go up. Okay, one more question. Were there any considerations of data elements being outlined in the Federal Integrated Business Framework for Grants Management? Yeah, we did look at the FIBF, as it's called, the Federal Integrated Business Framework that the GSA's USSM group has published for grants management. For performance specifically, those elements are a little bit generic in the way that they are suggesting they be collected. The data elements are not final, so they haven't been published as a final data set. They were available, I think, in the period of January and February earlier this year for public comments. We did have the opportunity to look at them, but just to note that they are not yet published as a final data set. In terms of the capability, the FIBF asks that agencies collect performance data and align it with their objectives and goals as we went through in the performance framework. But the capabilities are not suggesting how they do it and to what detail or granularity that is done. I think that may be more available in the data sets, but again, because of the kind of information the performance data collects will be very different agency to agency.
If I may add, I think if you sort of visualize the logic model that Rujuta shared, the input in terms of the resources and what activities the federal agency undertook are coming actually out of US spending and grants.gov. And both of those actually are, part of capabilities that are already listed in the FIBF framework in terms of, publishing your funding opportunities, as well as, issuing data in terms of what is sort of the budget for that program. In terms of how many grants sort of were issued and things like that, that comes out of like capabilities such as the awards module, where you can figure out like, how many grantees you're actually going to award and how the money goes out. And until that point, I think like, most of the times you should be able to standardize those data elements across your organization. It is when you start talking about the outputs and the outcomes, the FIBA framework is going to say that, okay, hey, you should collect performance data, but the instruments for them actually are pretty different, and they're going to vary by program. In the past, the federal government has tried to create project forms such as the SFPPR, but we haven't really seen that being very useful. Because it is at an extremely high level. If you want to just collect simple output data, you'll be able to use that form. But majority of the time, if you want to have any level of detail within your data so that you can slice and dice and analyze information, you are probably looking at collecting performance data using specific data collection instruments. So there, while the capabilities is required by the FIBF, we may actually have to come up with specific formats depending on your program.
Okay, any other questions? I think we answered all of the questions that came in. Okay, so again, if you have any further questions after our conversation today, please feel free to reach out to us through our website, or you can email me directly and we will get back to you very soon. Thank you for joining our call today. I hope you got the information that you were looking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.